Hi, Chris. Well, obviously, I know from our conversations earlier that you're involved with lots of projects and trying to see through a fire strategy. Do you just want to tell me briefly what your major concerns are?
Yes, well, I mean, overall, I think I'm really hopeful the way things look like they're changing, and the changes that the government are bringing in. Some of which we may have to wait till 2022 for the complete overhaul of Part B. But the changes that have already been brought in, and the later ones coming at the end of this year, all seem really positive. I think as architects, things that we can certainly improve in, overall competence in terms of design for fire, it goes without saying. But at the early stages of projects, I touched on some at the meeting, the question about design life and interrogating as part of the client's part of the brief. Asset management and design life, I think, is really important. Inevitably, sometimes I think architects are so keen to want to get on with the design that there isn't enough time spent at stage one, those early stage 0, stage 1, making sure everything in terms of design team and the brief is thoroughly understood before we then dive into the sort of concept design. So I think understanding and really thrashing out the sort of design life decisions, I think in terms of property protection is perhaps something we should be really challenging clients on more. The design team I touched on, making sure that because it's architect's duty to advise on design team, size of and scope of, and making sure fire engineer, building control body, the building insurer and any warranty provider, those folks are in place really early. Too often sometimes the warranty provider or the client might want to delay the choice for whatever reason, play the market until really late. And then we find warranty provider has their own requirements, which may go above or just be different to building regulations, and that can cause issues incorporating later. Far better to get the whole team involved really early, so they have an input into the developing of the brief as well, as much as anything else. I think in terms of sustainability as well, we touched on resilience and fire. I think there's a very strong link there to the sustainable credentials of a building, because to be truly sustainable, we should be designing buildings that inevitably fire events are going to occur at some time. And we need to be taking into account what are the implications of that. And if the implications are so catastrophic that huge elements of the building then need to be refurbished, then that reflects really badly on the sustainable credentials for the building. So that the implementation of things like sprinklers to restrict the growth of the fire to single compartments, and the use of materials that are going to be more resilient in a fire should be things that are taken into account and scored as part of a sustainable strategy, as would be the reuse of the building at the end, how the building is and how easy it is to retrofit or dismantle or reuse components of the building. That needs to run sort of right the way through. I also touched on the testing issue, because I mean, why that's a little bit of a hobby horse is because as architects, again, we're wanting to sort of push the boundaries, develop new systems with good sustainable credentials. We're coming up inevitably, and rightly so to a certain extent, against some resistance on things like CLT. But as I understand it, is really partly a sort of lack of testing that's been done, and that testing really needs to be done by manufacturers, but perhaps government could help in that regard as to the type of testing that's most appropriate to something like CLT. In some instances, I'm not convinced that the type of testing that we have at the moment is always most appropriate. They're talking about BS 8414 test, which is the one that's been done for external cladding, of changing that to incorporate balconies, for instance, into the test. It might be that we need to think about green walls. We're looking and designing at the moment some large buildings with green walls, but clearly there are issues there with regards fire, and the testing, the existing testing, may not be the most appropriate to make a true assessment of how green walls perform in terms of fire. So I think there are several strands that need to go, that run together to improve the environment so that we can confidently start specifying some of these materials and systems that undoubtedly have great sustainable credentials, but we want to be able to do it knowing and confident that they will also produce a building that's, you know, is safe, not just life safety, but property protection as well.
So you think there's a danger, do you, that our very correct concern now about fire safety could, if it's carried out the wrong way and into formulaic a way, it could actually hamper innovation in materials?
Baby and bathwater, yes. I think that slightly knee-jerk reaction, being totally prescriptive with regards to the non-combustible materials in external walls, well, it would be good to be able to have seen something tested, CLT tested, to see how it would actually perform. It would be a shame if blanket bans meant that we couldn't explore the possibility of using CLT in larger buildings. And that's why I really sort of mention it's the testing. No one would doubt if it's tested and it can't perform, then clearly. But there are a lot of arguments out there with regards to how CLT performs in a fire. And I understand each CLT manufacturer uses slightly different timbers and slightly different laminae with slightly different adhesives, all of which can have an effect on fire performance. So they kind of individually need to be tested. But we want to make sure that those tests are rigorous and
relevant,
And relevant, no, absolutely right. And every time we come up with a new modern method of construction, there are potential, perhaps different ways that they need to be tested. Volumetric construction, with pods which have cavities in between where fire can travel and the like. You feel that perhaps there ought to be specific testing for that sort of perhaps mock-ups that need to be tested as well. So I think there's an argument for looking slightly broader at testing to make sure the testing we're doing is actually relevant for the systems that we would like to use.